And let's go ahead and share my screen. So we're here this morning to do our ST workshop for the Master's Series. And so ST refers to storytelling. This is the track called The Art of Storytelling. And it's one of the courses we'll be teaching in this upcoming term. So there's a lot of information to go through because there are so many types of ST classes. If at any point you do have a question, please feel free to kind of turn your mic on and interject, leave it in the chat, or at the end of the call, I will have like a small QA session. But yeah, it's a good chance to ask some questions now that we're here doing training. The first thing we should kind of talk about is the objective of this track. We always want to teach to our objectives when we're in the classroom. So ultimately, we want to explore stories in different mediums. So students are going to understand that stories have more than just entertainment value, and that through all the different mediums, such as traditional writing and narratives, oral storytelling, filmmaking, and theater, there are a bunch of different things we can achieve when we tell stories. So at a glance, these are all the programs that are offered at the 100 and 200 levels. And on the side here, I've just listed a bunch of different activities I've run while teaching any of these storytelling tracks. The one I like to do the most in my class is any kind of reflection-based activity like journaling, because stories and literature are so subjective. The experience of reading them can be, yeah, really well explored by doing a personal reflection activity. Of course, you're going to run class discussions while we go through the different stories. And creative writing is another thing I stress a lot in this class because at least in my experience at Cheongnam, we do a lot of academic writing, but I feel like the students don't have too many chances to explore creative writing. So anything like doing some poetry, flash fiction, or book adaptations, those are all great options for you when you're doing this ST track. All right, so after all, it is a novel-based class, a storytelling class. And with the instructors that are in the call, I just wanted to kind of hear what your experience has been like at your campuses with your students reading. So if there's anyone that would kind of like to let us know, how's it gone in, say, like a C2 high class or a V1 class when students are reading books? What's your experience been like?
Um, in my classes, it's about 50-50, depending on how busy the students are. I know in one of my V1 classes I had last term, I had a class where maybe one student had read the book and the
Mhm.
rest of them did not read. And so discussion was kind of difficult, and it was difficult to um, kind of discuss the themes in the books as well.
Right. I think you make a really good point, Brandy. When the students aren't reading, that's very hard to dive into the thematic discussion. When you've prepped for the class, you know, it's going to become very difficult to run what you had planned when the students haven't read. And although master's students, of course, they're at a higher level, higher cognition and higher linguistic ability, Brandy just mentioned students can be very, very busy. So in this next slide here, I actually made a 시간표, like schedule of one of my master's students. He's in the 5th grade, and this is what his weekly schedule looks like. I didn't ask him what he does on Sundays. I think he mentioned church and something else, but ultimately, of course, they're at school every day, right? And then he's got like his extracurriculars. He comes to Cheongdam twice a week, and he also comes to the iLearning clinic that we host on Saturdays. Um, you know, his math class is like a 4-hour long math class he does twice a week. He has a home tutor that comes. He does Korean grammar lessons. He goes to Science Academy, and he's got homework, right, for all of those things that he does. And I feel like for me as a teacher, looking at this schedule, like I'm not sure about y'all, but my week doesn't look anything like this. I don't have all of these things to do every single day that my 5th grade student does. And so I think when we're teaching any class, but especially in the master's class where the readings are so dense and there are often like long page ranges assigned, empathy is going to be one of your biggest tools that you can have in the classroom. So when it comes to having the students complete their homework or complete the reading, I do personalized goals. So I have my students fill out like a homework tracker. I just make a handout and it's their personal homework tracker where they keep track of what's reasonable for them. Because even reading 1 page or 5 pages is better than reading zero. And I think it's reasonable that every student can at least read 5 pages of the assigned 70 or however long is assigned in the syllabus. And that's true for any kind of homework questions that get assigned in masters as well. So the other strategy is really just to prep as if the students have not read. Going into the class, knowing that if they've read, excellent, I can run it this way. But if they have not, which I feel like we've all probably been in those shoes, if you've done more than one, term at CDI and you've done a V1 or a C2 high class, things that you can do is to have like a lot of additional media prepped into the textbook to make sure that your questions that you prepare are less about reading comprehension and more about personalized discussion questions on the themes, or scenario-based questions. So for this kind of strategy of, practicing the empathy, I think it's like using a V1 kind of teaching method, right? So in our V1 classes, we do a lot of close reading out loud. We have certain, concept context pages and act pages where we open up and we read like a small section of the book. You're going to want to do the same thing in this storytelling class, is read small paragraphs out loud together. Something else you can do is have students keep a list of characters, just like how V1 has like pictures of all the characters and we put traits under their names. You can do the same thing for the master's stories. And I make my students keep track of like the key plot points in their paper notebook. So as we discuss something in the class, we note it down so that later we can always refer back to what had happened in the story. Okay, so this is just my problem solving here, because in an ideal world, all of our master's students will read, everything in their storytelling track. But as I showed before, and as you probably know, they're very busy, so it might not happen. Okay, so with that in mind, here are the different programs that we offer, like at a glance. And there's a new one that has now been added, which is ST 103, called Visual Literacy. So there are 3 100 level classes and 4 200 level classes. Typically, 100 level classes are for pre or standard master students, and 200 level classes are for the grand master students. And when we're prepping for these classes, these are some of the ways I like to approach it. So I like to do either a unit-based prep or a theme-based prep. And what this requires for me in my master's class is that I have to kind of read ahead in the book. Like I feel like when I teach a lower level V1, I can kind of just go week by week and know what's happening in the book each time. But I like to prep for overarching themes that occur in the book, or with like each different segment of the book or each unit that we cover, what's happening. So if you can read ahead and you have the time to read ahead, I do recommend that. Also, there are tons of different AI tools right now, for example, like Coral AI, where you can just upload a PDF of the book into the AI and ask the book, like, what are the different, or ask the AI, like, the different themes of the book, the different units, can you break down the storyline? And so just going into the class in week 1 with like a broader picture of the novel rather than only having read the first part, I think that's a really good strategy as well. And it will also help you to prep with your final project or your term project in mind. So these different tracks, some of them have just one big final project, others have like term projects that we do throughout, and we're going to take a look at that as well. But if you do have a term project, you don't want to be surprised by it when you open up your week 5 textbook and you're like, oh, I didn't realize we're doing this long term project now. I haven't planned ahead. Okay, so keeping that in mind, some strategies and modifications that can help you when you're in the master's classroom, and not just the ST classroom, but I think this is really for any level of master's class. One thing I always do is creating a Google Drive for my class That way I can upload things like the vocab lists, the syllabuses, I can put PDFs of the book, I can put homework questions, all of the students' projects and essays and everything is organized into like a Drive folder. I'm curious, has anyone tried that at their campus? Maybe by a show of hands, anyone who has done a Google Drive with their students or something similar, Google Classroom? Okay, nice. Leslie, do you mind telling us what your experience was like a little bit with that?
Um, Instead of having it for specifically just one class, I had it for multiple different classes. And if
Okay.
anything, it was like younger students. So those students just started making lots of different slides and all that with different names, which are sometimes not actually related to the class.
So you were doing it with like young levels?
Yeah.
Uh,
I did it from usually from I think Bridge all the way to ABBA Plus.
okay, I see. How about in Alba Plus? Did you have the same situation where they were just making random stuff and not making use of the project folders or vocab lists?
When it was ABBA Plus, they were more focused and they actually had like
Mhm.
better content in their projects.
Okay, that's good. So I think hopefully if Alba Plus shows us anything is that hopefully the master students will do the same thing. In my personal experience, it has been helpful. It's a way for students to be able to look back on the material as well, because as you know, when the smart textbook closes, like all of the information they wrote in there gets lost. They can't refer back to it. So Google Drive is a nice strategy you could try. Always lesson prepping with what your students need. So if that means in smaller sections or if that means less homework questions, just make the appropriate modifications that are going to make your classes run the best. Um, and so with projects and with homework, I like to do modifications like making actual paper handouts. I know with Cheongdam everything is tab based, but I'm a little bit old school. I like things to be on paper and I like for there to be a physical copy. That way I can actually leave red pen comments and mark things up. And a lot of the projects in this track, ST, are solo projects, but I modify a lot of things to be group work as well. So those are all just tips leading into the ST series. And what we'll do now is take a look at every one of the tracks. And as I said, there's a lot of information to kind of get through. But I'll do my best. ST 101 is the first level of the storytelling series, and it's about storyscapes. So we read the art and the science of storytelling, we read the Hunger Games, and then we read a novel on podcasting called Make Noise. So students, first of all, learn what storytelling is all about. They read a piece of dystopian fiction, and then they're reading about podcasting. So in this project, in this track, we want them to analyze different mediums like books, films, and podcasts. And podcasts are emphasized a lot in the 101 track. So ultimately, the final project for this class is for the students to make their own podcast. And homework that they have throughout is for them to listen to podcasts at home and fill out handouts on those podcasts. So your syllabus looks a little something like this, 3 weeks, right? And then we have our 5 weeks here, and then again, 4 weeks for the podcasting. I'll skip over this because I feel like you can read the segment guides at home on your own. That's fine, but I think it's good to talk about the breakdowns of what types of output we'll do in this class. So for 101, the first type is creative writing. In the creative writing, something that can be helpful is that lesson 3 goes over like a writing workshop on how to write creatively, because the students, again, are so used to like the academic writing. When you ask them to write a story, they tend to struggle a little bit with how to be creative. So we can offer them some tips and tricks for that. There are no set prompts for the assignment, so it is really freestyle. Whatever kind of story the students want to come up with is up to them. But always have specific instructions on hand, because I think our students need some structure and framework sometimes, which can also help with their creativity. Okay. So then the next part we have is a world building project. This can be done on PowerPoint or on another comparable tool like Canva. You could also do this using like videos and make the world building into a video project where they create their own dystopian world. And this is in response to reading The Hunger Games. So the project starts in lesson 6 and is continued all the way till lesson 8. So this is what we consider a term project in which it runs for 3 consecutive weeks. One thing to keep in mind is when students are absent. So let's say they were absent in week 6, it can be tricky when they show up in week 7 and we're in the continuation phase. So I always try to have like small modified versions of the project ready on hand for if a student is going to be absent. Okay, and then for the end, the final project is the podcasting. So they come up with a concept, they plan and write their scripts, they pitch their podcast, and then they actually like record it and edit it and use different softwares. A lot of my students like to use this app called One Shot. Some of them also just did it in Canva. And then in lesson 13, they present their podcast episodes and we do like a round table. We listen to everyone's podcasts and give feedback. So this was a really fun project. I've taught this track 2 times and the students tend to really enjoy this final project here. And the nice part is that we obviously have 5 different lessons to cover it, so we can come up with a much larger and more detailed output. Okay, so there is story writing homework and just writing homework in general in the first month. And then there's podcasting homework that goes from weeks 7 until 11. Okay. Now there's a list of pre-approved podcast episodes that's on the FTP server, and it looks something like this. So when you log into the FTP, Cheongdam has prepped like podcasts that would be generally, like including content that's appropriate for students and would have themes that are interesting for them. And so you can assign a different podcast for them to listen to each week. In my class, my students got really hooked on the Adventures of Eleanor Amplified. It's actually like a series-based podcast in which each 20 minutes or 15 minutes, it tells the story of Eleanor as she goes through these kinds of like crazy, wacky adventures. And so what I did is we just listened to Eleanor Amplified every single week because it was chapter installments and the kids had a lot of fun with it. But if there are any other podcasts that you yourself are interested in or you think your students would be interested in, you can feel free to modify the homework assignments for podcasting. And while they listen to the podcast, they fill out this handout at home, which is also available on the FTP. So what was the podcast, the running time, the length, and then what kind of format was it, the structure, and then summarize the episode. So this is an example of the type of homework they have from week 7 until 11. So that's our first track, 101. In 102, this is story to screen. So this is a class based on stories that have become movies. So of course, we start with Jurassic Park, a cult classic. We have The Martian, and then we also have The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So here we want to show how written mediums can be translated into visual elements. And there's a strong emphasis on the themes of science and tech and how those affect our society and what kind of developments are going to be made in the future. So Jurassic Park is by far the longest because it's quite a long novel. And so this is where I think it becomes really important to be realistic about like reading homework and completion. Like if you take a look at lesson 3, they have like 100 pages that they need to read. And I feel like for me, at least, the very first time I was assigned like 100 pages to read was, at least in Canada, that doesn't happen until late middle school or high school. But these master classes at my campus are being taught with like 4th, 5th, and 6th grade students. And so if they don't read all 100 pages, we need to be ready for that. We need to pick out the most important moments and maybe even modify and assign, like, I want you to read specifically, if you don't have time to read all of this, you at least need to read from 2:30 until 2:60. Like assign them chunks so that at least they don't come to class being like, I didn't read anything, and they have no idea. They need to have at least like scene-based ideas of what's happening. So of course, you need to assign the reading, but as their teacher and prepping with their best interest in mind, you are able to break this down into smaller sections, which again kind of requires you to be reading ahead or reading the book and understanding what are those key sections. So it does take more prep, but in the end, I feel like you get a higher level of reward out of the class and a higher level of participation. Again, this is just in the segment guide, so I'll let you all take a look at this on your own time. So this track 102 has a term project in which students take their favorite book and turn it into kind of like a scene play and a script. So 15 to 20 pages of a master's level difficulty book. If it's an easier book that they want to choose, 20 to 30 pages. In my class, a lot of my students chose one of the Harry Potter books, and so they ended up doing about 20 pages of Harry Potter. This gets introduced to them in week 1, and then across varying weeks, we have different goals that we meet in the class, and we work on the term project throughout. Okay, so one thing I would recommend is if you see on your schedule that you're having 102 and you know that there's a term project, what I would do on my Sunday afternoon when I'm prepping is I would just go flick through all 13 lessons. You don't have to read the whole thing, but I would open them up and at least make a note for myself and understand like what weeks is what happening. That way I'm not just like going in blind, because week 1, we're already starting with an introduction. And so if I'm introducing something as the teacher, I like to know what's happening for the rest of the part, you know? So that's my tip, is just like open up all the lessons and have a look. Here's an example of the kind of handout I made for my students. I made a template for them to do script writing, and I gave them this template. And so I made in marks of like, this is where you put your scene heading, and this is what the dialogue looks like, or here's a shot number, and all these kinds of things. I also paired students for this project into like desk friends. We did it in pairs of 2. That way they could have somebody to help them and ask questions, and be able to edit and work back and forth together. And it also helped me plan for student absences. So if one of the friends was absent, at least the other student was still there and some work could get done on the term project. So the timeline is like this. We introduce in week 1, we choose the book in week 3. There's drafts due in 6 and a check in 9. The second draft is in 11 and the final draft is 13. Okay. All right, and the final 100 level class is called Visual Storytelling. This is a new one that we're offering. And I'm actually very excited about this class because I got the opportunity to make the textbook. So I'm probably a little bit biased going into this part of the presentation, but I think this is going to be a really fun track. Visual literacy is where we read 3 books. Picture This by Molly Bang, Persepolis, a graphic novel, and then this last one, which is a guidebook on the power of visual storytelling. So ultimately, this is kind of like a bit of like an art class in a sense, where we have students try to understand art concepts and design elements and how they apply to stories. So in the first lesson, there is no book. In the SMART textbook, we just made an introduction to all different parts of visual storytelling. So I'll show y'all what that actually looks like. And we can just take a look at the lesson 1 together there. So let me open up the portal one moment. Okay, so I'll screen share this. So what I mean by not having a book is like you're just using the STB, and in the STB, we in the dive pages go over different mediums. So painting and questions about different types of painting, sculpture and examples of famous sculptures, ready-mades and that kind of thing, photography, and we tried to choose, you know, really famous standout photographers and their works, and then discussion questions about all of the elements. So this first lesson is for them to understand some different mediums and to go through. And then the project is where they choose one of the Times 100 most influential photographs, a famous photo, and then make a story about what's happening in that photo. So that's just for lesson 1. But the rest of the track does have the book. So Picture This runs for 2 weeks, Persepolis is 4 weeks, and The Power of Visual Storytelling is also 4 weeks. So in Persepolis, it's a graphic novel about the Iranian Revolution. And so I think students should quite enjoy this. I think one of the old literature tracks from Masters 4.0 also taught Persepolis. So this might look familiar to some people. But it's really great because students enjoy reading comic books and graphic novels. And so this is a nice read for them. And then in the visual storytelling handbook, we go through different things like infographics and ads, making blogs. They talk about Facebook, Tumblr, Twitter, all those different kinds of mediums for telling visual stories. And there is a term project, which is a graphic novel project. So students are going to make their own graphic novel in this course in weeks 4, 5, and 6. And then the final project is where they make their own like social media marketing campaign using that last book that we're reading. So they come up with a campaign strategy and a pitch deck, and they make the social media posts, and then they present those. So those are all the 100 level classes. Now we'll move to the 200 level. The first one is called Career Portfolio 201. So here it's really a fun track because students are doing a lot of self-reflection and identifying their career goals, but also their academic goals and what they want as a student or their life goals. The goal here is to get them ready for if they were doing like an international school interview, or maybe down the line like a job interview. So we're trying to simulate real world situations with the students and have them discover how to market their own qualities. So there is no book for this class. Instead, it's just standalone lessons that go over different skills we need to make our career portfolio. And we make the portfolio in standalone projects that happen each week. So like a cover letter, a school interview prep, a work proposal, a business plan. And then in the end, we put together our proposal and make our final portfolio of all of our work. So for these student portfolios, I found that obviously the content, if I flip back for a moment, it is very like work and academic based, like school interview, writing a resume, writing a cover letter, doing some journalism. Those kinds of things were quite academic. So what I ended up doing was I modified the project a little bit. And what I did was I had my students just make their career portfolio on these following items. So all about you, introduce your goals, introduce your education and experience. What are your best skills? What are 3 of your best projects that you've ever made? And what are some awards or accolades you've won as a student? They also needed to get like a letter of reference, or sort of like a teacher reference. So if we just go through and look at my student Lucia's, Sohyun's portfolio, she introduced herself. She went through some of her academic goals and her career goals overall. She kind of made a mini resume of like her experiences and her education. She took pictures of different projects she's done that she was proud of, her skills that she's good at, and she demonstrated some of these skills. So she did this Korean tongue twister for the class, which was quite fun. And she's very good at drawing and illustrating, so she included those. She has a video of herself playing piano and doing flying yoga, which is very cool that she does that. And yeah, so even though the class itself is based around like put in your resume and put in your school intervention plan and put in your cover letter, I kind of modified this so that my students, as Korean students, could realistically show like, as a Korean student, what is their best work? Like, what are some of their best projects and their strengths? And so I allowed them to include really whatever they wanted. If it was a science project, if it was like this was a school dance competition that she did, a drawing interview video she made with a classmate. And although the content was in Korean, I think what it reflects is that it's the students' real life, right? And since our goal here is to have them make this career portfolio and a portfolio as a student, I thought that was an appropriate modification to make. So y'all can feel free to do the same thing for this 200 level track. Okay, so that's 201. 202 is a drama and performance track. So this is where we start introducing a lot of the drama classics like Ibsen's A Doll's House. We do Shakespeare, No Fear, Hamlet. We do Oscar Wilde. So they're learning a lot of the canon European drama. And they're trying to learn the different performance styles and what it means to take this story and script and bring it to life as an actual play. So the first lesson does not have any book. It's just a series of monologues that are in the SMART textbook. And then we do Hamlet for a month. The longest one is A Doll's House, and we do that over the course of 6 weeks. And again, you'll see that some of the reading ranges are like quite long, right? When we're having them read 90 to 100 pages, that can be really tough. Also, even though it's No Fear Shakespeare, it's still Hamlet. Like, has anyone read Shakespeare before? Show of hands. I had to read it during my literature school undergrad, and like for me as a uni student, it was hard. It's not regular English, it's Middle English. The references are weird. It's written in like quintets and couplets. And so to ask an elementary school student, like, hey, can you read 90 pages of this at home by yourself? It's going to be hard, right? So just keep that in mind. Um, okay, let me go back to my presentation. Sorry, I hopped out. Okay. Feel like I'm giving you all motion sickness. I'm jumping back and forth. Can you see my screen, you guys? It's kind of, can anyone let me know?
You can see it, or I can see it.
You can see it? Okay, it's showing up weird on my end. Let me stop.
Yeah, I can see it.
Huh. I can't see it. That's weird. It's good that y'all can see it, but okay, let me try one more thing. Okay, I can see it now too. That's good. Thanks for your patience. Okay. Yes. So we have the plays that we go through. Again, this is in the segment guide. I'll let you take a look. Now, this class has some different kind of strategies that we'll use. It's the most unique class I've ever taught at Cheongdam because it's really like drama class. So if there are any theater kids who are in the call, I personally was a theater kid in middle school and high school. I loved teaching this class because, first of all, we're encouraged to kind of set up performance space. So get the students out of their desks, move the desks to the back of the room, and set up a designated space in which we perform. I also tried to kind of, just like how my drama classroom had like blocks and risers and different levels to experiment with, I tried to encourage the students that they could like sit on the desks or sit on chairs and get up on different levels and try to move around the room. And this helped us to kind of delineate what is like the studying space where we sit down and talk about the book, and where is the acting space in which we get up and actually do the activities. And before we did any of the performances, we would always start up with some kind of like theater game or warm up. So there are loads of prompts included in lessons 2 and 3. But if you go online and do a quick search, you'll be able to find lots of different warm up games. For example, yes and, or like taxi cab confessional, or any of those kinds of games that you can play with students. And they had a lot of fun because this is so different than what we usually do at Cheongdam. We're actually playing games, we're being silly, we're laughing, we're moving our bodies, we're not sitting down in the desk. So if you do get scheduled for 202, in my opinion, this is a really great track. Final project starts happening from week 11, and in this class, they are putting together a one-act play. I believe it's also designed to be like a one-man, one-woman play, but do feel free to make appropriate modifications if the students want to work in groups. I think it's okay for them to be grouped together. And so, yeah, of course, they put their final project together. They work on it in week 12 and present in week 13. Okay. What I did in this class is I actually recorded their final projects, which I don't usually do in a master's class, but since it was drama and performance, I wanted to add like an element of it being a bit more serious and like you're actually performing for the camera. And then it was quite fun because the students felt proud to like go home and show their parents their scenes and like what they did for their plays. And I put those into the Google Drive. So I was able to just upload the videos into the drive and then they had them at home and showed their family and friends and everything like that. So yeah, that was a lot of fun. Okay, now we have 203 data literacy. So this is based on Hans Rolling's book Factfulness, in which we're really debunking the way we see the world today, and presenting different facts and statistics to actually give a better view on what the world really looks like and how to interpret the data around it, ergo the name data literacy. So we read factfulness just for the whole term. And actually in this track, as you'll see, the assigned reading is a lot more realistic, which is great because we're just reading one book the whole time. So I think in this case, it's okay, 25 pages or 20 pages of a novel is much more realistic to ask a student to read rather than in some of the other tracks we just looked at, they had 100 pages, right? So just always keep in mind what you're assigning and take a realistic approach to homework completion. This is in the segment guide. Okay, something that's important to note here that I pulled out of the seg guide though, is that the book does feel rather technical. Okay, has anyone read it? I'm just curious. It was like a super popular, it's kind of pop science, but it was going around. Any readers of Factfulness? No, okay, that's fine.
Yeah,
It
I
is
have.
very, oh, sorry.
I have.
Okay, what did you think of it? I'm just curious.
Like you said, it was like pop, uh, like kind of like pop, your psychology. But
Yeah.
it's like, I think it's a good introduction to like, being critical of certain things. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that's why it was chosen, right? Is it is a bit of a more pop science approach. And while it does seem technical at first, there are a lot of scenarios that Rowling like goes through. And when you teach the class, you can pull out and tease out certain scenarios to make it more fun and interesting and like less academically taxing. Because I think the way this textbook is set up is that there's a potential for it to be a bit overwhelming. But we want it to be more fun and interesting and a good introduction to the concepts. Okay, and the last class I'm going to talk about is 204, which is the journalism track. So here we are emphasizing journalistic writing and being able to think logically and critically on global issues. So we cover a whole whack of different topics, kind of like debate style topics and things that would be in the news. We talk about media bias and talking about kind of the ethics and morals of reporting and how to tell a story on current events. So there's no book for this track. It's just, again, standalone lessons in the tab, but there's always a different theme for each week. And what I did was like prepare actual recent news articles on that theme. So for example, universal basic income, maybe like Lee Jae-myung was trying to introduce that in Korea as one of his platforming points. And so I found an article on Lee Jae-myung's stance. Or animal testing, there's lots of articles about makeup or dish soap or different things being tested on animals. You can pull those topics. Although there's migrant crisis and it specifically says Europe, of course, you could use like Russia and Ukraine as an example. You could use a bunch of different global conflicts as an example here. Yeah, but there's lots of different topics. And then we have just different news pieces that go with them. And so that's the reading that the students are doing. And each class introduces a different skill theory, like in media, how to do each one of those things, how to annotate an article properly, how to find symbolism, how to find the author's voice and perspective, or if they're appealing to pathos, ethos, or logos, those kinds of things. Okay, I went over this already. Okay, my last little slide here is kind of just showing you some interesting resources if you haven't used them already, like Crash Course History, the Khan Academy, the Good Life series is really nice. I use Wi-Fi as well, and Wikipedia can be a good place to start too for doing research on any of these topics. like if you've never read Hamlet before and you want to get, you know, the gist of it. And of course, we have AI tools that you can use to help you prep for all those things too. The last thing I want to do here is just show you from a team leader's perspective what they're looking for when they're watching a master's class. So for me at Mokdom branch, when I'm watching my teachers, there are two specific checkpoints that we have to watch for. And I just think as instructors, it can be useful to know like what are the TLs or the, you know, FMs actually looking for. And the first checkpoint is if the instructor is able to establish and confirm the student's understanding of the lesson content. Okay, pretty straightforward. Really just means, are you listening? Are you engaging? Are you going through the content and having the students respond to the readings and the class discussions? This one tends to be a pretty big check. The second one is if students are able to apply the skills they learned on the Explore page into their project. So for example, in Explore, if the Explore page talks about symbolism, did you make sure that the project involves some kind of use of symbolism in the activity? There needs to be like a transference of this, and that's the second point that we look for. Okay. So for the first point, just making sure you go over the dive pages or reading comprehension questions. And for the second checkpoint, linking the skill theory to the lesson content to demonstrate transference. Just thought that will be like an interesting thing. I'm not sure if the team leaders at your schools or campuses have ever shown that before, but yeah, that's how I wanted to end. And then we also have room for a Q&A if there are any further questions.
I have a question.
Sure.
Um, it may be a dumb question, but in
Oh.
this in the case of the students not being able to read certain chapters, are we allowed to give them like a cliff notes of each chapter to help them for the week?
Yeah, that's a nice strategy. That's something I actually did in my Google Drive was like pull the Cliff Notes or the yeah, the like lifesaver summary websites that I'm sure we all use during college, and pulled those notes together. And that's a strategy as a student, right? Is at least like look through the summary. Like I tell my students, like you have to at least do the bare minimum. Or honestly, with like ChatGPT and everything now, I'm like, you have to at least type the book's name into ChatGPT and like find out what it's about. There's no way you can come to class and tell me you don't know anything about this book. So yeah, Shauna, I think that's like a really realistic tip and strategy is having like cliff notes or summaries prepared as like a supplementary material.
I think that's what I did in college. That's what I'm asking.
Yeah, well, I think that's what we
Just
all did,
cramming
right?
in.
Like
Yeah.
as students, we're busy and like the Korean students, I mean, I'm sure y'all know our students are so busy. They go through the academy gamut. They're doing way more than I'm doing, right? As an adult. So yeah, I think if we can make their lives easier and then make our life easier because the classroom discussions will be more enjoyable, I think that's great.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, so what I'll do is I'll just pop my email into the chat right here. So if something does come up later, y'all can always feel free to email me.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
For the different tracks, is it up to the instructor to decide which track they want to use, or
Oh, that's a great question. So at my campus, it's like the Korean timjangnims and the faculty manager get together and they decide on the programming. But I think each campus might be different. If you have input at your own campus, if you can say like, hey, I really want to teach ST 103, for example, I think that would be really cool if you're able to do that. Personally, at my campus, we just get told like, these are the tracks we're running and like, here's your schedule. But yeah.
okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, and the last thing then, if there are no further questions, yeah, of course, feel free to email me. I'm also going to send y'all a survey now. If you can just complete that for me very quickly. Let me pull this up. Okay. The survey just kind of asks about your experience, in the calls, you know, if you enjoyed having it online or if you would prefer for the workshops to be done in person, like those kinds of things. So it's just valuable feedback for us to get on the HQ side of things. So I put the link to the survey in the chat. My name is Michelle. So when it asks for the workshop facilitator, please select my name. And then y'all can go ahead and fill out those questions. And once you are done with that, you can leave the call and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.